As you all know, the siege mode on the striker battleships has been nerfed, or in the case of the Raven Striker, the siege mode got significantly buffed. However, the buff on the Raven Striker isn't as noticeable on practical use as it is on paper. However, the nerf on the other three strikers is quite noticeable. I would say the Apocalypse Striker has received the biggest nerf. I did notice a significant drop in applicable DPS and a significant drop in the range on the lasers. Now the trait description hasn't been changed, this is the same as it used to be. I believe that there isn't much to nerf on the Apocalypse anymore. The ship already has its weaknesses, and of course it has its strengths like any other ship. And the attributes and fittings are also the same. The Apocalypse is still a armor tank, has a decent capacitor on paper, however once the lasers start working the capacitor does run down pretty quickly. Now I have 2.3 thousand DPS on the Apocalypse. My Apocalypse usually is a PvP ship. If I do missions, I run the missions with the Macario. 53.25 kilometers. Now I recall this being about 60 kilometers with this build, and not really sure why I lost 7 kilometers. Perhaps it has to do something with the nerf, but I use triple tracking computers and dual heatsinks. Now I noticed a lot of players already started to use a lot more tracking computers, because in the siege mode you lose about 10% of your maximum range. And well, because lasers do have a big DPS dip once you go outside of the optimal range, the applicable damage does go down drastically once the target goes a little bit further away from the optimal range of the ship.
Undocking.
The rest of the build of this ship is roughly the same. I only changed the warp optimizers into targeting rigs for the insta-lock ability that this ship can do. So with 53.25 km is the optimal range, 8.18 is the fall-off. With the siege mode now active, the range should drop to 47.92 and 7.36 kilometers, which doesn't look much on paper. However, when you start shooting targets, yeah, you will notice your DPS and the applicable damage drastically go down. The weapon range, the minus 10% weapon range, is the new siege mode attribute, and of course the missile explosion velocity and radius change that works for the Raven Striker is the other one. 3.3 thousand DPS, I would say the DPS is roughly about the same. I don't really look at the DPS of this ship that often. 3.8 with one heatsink, and with the second heatsink it's 4.3 thousand DPS. And honestly, I'm quite happy with this result. After all, it has some really nice range. Well, it used to have nice range, now I have to use extra tracking computers. And well, I just figured out that I use 300 million ISK worth tracking computers, so I guess I'll have to change this very expensive modules. But the tracking computers might be very useful now, because it will extend the optimal range of the lasers.
Docking request accepted.
I also did use the triple heatsink build, and back in the day I actually used quad heatsinks, but nowadays I can't really do that because of the significant range decrease, which will mean that I have to be closer, and if I am closer to the targets, it means that I am taking much more damage, which in result means that I will have to change the build if I plan to run missions with the good old Apocalypse. Now the same can be also applied for PvP, because the Apocalypse did rely on the range. You basically outrange most of the targets with the Apocalypse.
Undocking.
And now if I would replicate the same build, yeah, it would not work very well, because now I would be in the optimal range of most brawler ships. So let's take a look at the DPS with triple heatsinks. 3.5 thousand, 45.15 kilometer optimal range, 6.94 kilometer is the accuracy fall-off. And for missions, I can't really use this build anymore because I will be taking damage from the ships, and without a armor repairer or shield booster, I will have to warp out and repair the ship at one point. 4000 DPS with one heatsink, 4,500 with the second heatsink, and with the third one it's 4,800 at 45.15 kilometers or 6.94 kilometers if we go for the accuracy fall-off. Tracking is 0.5, which equals the tracking of a dreadnought. My Revelation has better tracking than the Apocalypse Striker, which is a little bit funny. 65.42, and with the second one 83.04 kilometer optimal range, but this is only for a short amount of time, only for about 10 seconds. 10 seconds 65 kilometers and 20 seconds of 83 kilometers. So only for a short burst or only for destroying one single target in the siege mode. It can help with the tracking, of course, but only for a very short amount of time. Okay, now for missions, if I go and run missions, I will have to have an armor repair, and this would be the build that I would use. And in the medium slots you can use target painters, however I prefer to use a Nosferatu and webs just in case a small ship gets close, or you can keep this build with triple webs and one scrambler. Again, it works really well against smaller ships that come within range. Now most players like to run beam lasers on the Apocalypse, but beam lasers use a lot more capacitor, and well, with the reduced range you will have to be closer to the ships, and in order to maintain the range it means you have to sacrifice DPS, or you have to go and change the build into a tank. But let's actually see how this ship performs in combat. Now for missions I usually go run the Macario, but for this little task I will be using the Apocalypse Striker. Now in the siege mode with the track computer you will hit targets really well actually, which is one of the selling points for the Apocalypse. It has really good tracking, and overall lasers do impact the target very easily even if you are in the siege mode. However, with this nerf you might notice that you will do a little bit less damage. Okay, sorry for the weird pause. For a second I thought that a Nestor popped in the camp. Now back to the Apocalypse Striker. So with this nerf you will notice that your lasers will do less damage at the usual optimal range. So that means you have to get closer, and the siege mode does give you a increased signature radius, which means that the pirate ships will easily hit the Apocalypse. Now that is not a big problem if you have a tank. However, if you have a tank then you will probably sacrifice the DPS. Now I don't have the pulse crystal or focused crystal implant. I actually would use the thermal circulation implant for extra tank so that I can maintain the DPS, but at the same time if you have the focus crystal or pulse crystal they do increase the DPS, so you will end up clearing the missions faster, which means you have a lot of options to choose from in order to change the build. I know some of my friends use the Abaddon for missions and they are doing really well with the Abaddon. I would say the Abaddon is very close and in some cases outperforming the Apocalypse Striker in terms of the applicable DPS, because the Abaddon has about 55 to 60 kilometer range and it can have about 6,000 average DPS. Now with the Apocalypse Striker, in order to achieve that DPS you have to go with the siege mode, but if you do that you lose range. So now I kind of understand why players are switching to the Abaddon. However, doesn't really mean that the Apocalypse is useless now. This ship is still going to be really good, and a lot of players still will keep using the Apocalypse as their mission ship, or in my case, I will still use the Apocalypse as my PvP ship. I would say the nerf did put the strikers, basically balance them out to one another. After all, the nerf was about the same for all of them. We'll have to test out the other strikers to see how they perform, but in real use, in practical use, the Apocalypse Strikers nerf was the one that was, I would say, the most significant. However, as you can see, I still do fairly well. Haven't been taking much damage, and the damage taken is going to vary significantly depending on the mission and depending on where you run the mission. This is in Serpentis space, so it means that I will be shot at by kinetic explosive and with thermal.
We're under attack.
So if I get in armor, they will do some good damage to me. However, if I were to use one adaptive and thermal circulation, I could reduce the incoming damage quite a bit.
We're under attack.
Although in most cases one armor repair should be enough. One armor repair and one adaptive should be enough. And this is where the Apocalypse Striker has also its weakness, because it only has 6 low slots. So in order to make the ship tanky, you will have to do some DPS sacrifices. Or, well, you can risk and going full glass. However, in order to maintain the range, again, you will have to use a lot of tracking computers, which brings the idea of using general units to the table. However, the general units, while they can extend your range a lot with the tracking computers, they can make the tracking bad, so that you can't hit the target even at 100 kilometers, because in siege mode you still need the extra tracking from the computers in order to maximize the damage output. So generally speaking, this was a let's say a very bad day for the Apocalypse, because no matter what kind of combination you do, no matter what change you make on the ship, you will always notice that it would lack in some aspects comparing the ship to the previous performance before the nerf. And I guess that was the goal, to make all of the ships basically balanced out. Now, what do I think about the nerf? Well, in my case, from my personal experience, I don't really mind it, because it means that other ships will be used a lot more often. Players would be more creative with their builds, and you can still make the ship work, which in the end is what matters to me the most. It would be a problem if the ship was nerfed into oblivion and if the ship was basically useless. However, that's not the case. The Apocalypse Striker is still a really solid ship, even after this little nerf. So it's not as bad as it sounds. However, if you are flying this ship, you will notice a significant difference to its previous performance. Now this is, I believe, the second mission that I warp to. So far, it does clear it very nicely. Now, why do I use the Macario for missions? Well, mostly because I already have the barraging plant, and I just like flying the Macario. It's one of the oldest ships that I have.
Damaged.
And the barraging plant doesn't really change much.
Shield damaged.
It's basically made the ticks from 12 million to about 13-14 million, which honestly isn't much of a big difference. After all, the barraging plant is good for striking down one single ship, or basically to quickly remove the small ships first, and then you have to shoot the big ones with the normal DPS. And of course, the Apocalypse has the range advantage over the Macario. The Macario has to be really close, while the Apocalypse, even nerfed, still has a significantly higher range than the Macario, which is still one of the key selling points on the Apocalypse Striker. Now, I am a little bit worried about the Megatron Striker as well, because as you all know, blasters already have a pretty bad range. And with extra 10% less range in the siege mode, the Megatron Striker might be a lot easier to counter. I see one RB with tracking disruptors absolutely crippling one Megatron Striker. Can probably make the range of that ship about 1 kilometer with the RB cover drops, because of the bonus that it has on the tracking disruptors. We'll have to test it out, because if that ends up being the case, then the Megatron Striker has received an equal nerf to the Apocalypse Striker. However, with the Megatron Striker I would be a little bit more worried, because it already had very bad range. Now, the Tempest Striker, I think, has it the easiest, because you can easily make the range back up to its original form by using
Enemy ships
the tracking computers, and of course turrets. The projectile turrets work a little bit differently. They do hit even above their optimal range. It would probably have a small effect on the applicable damage. Probably will miss a couple hits, but it's not as bad as with the Apocalypse Striker, and definitely not going to be anywhere near the range reduction on the Megatron Striker. So perhaps I'm actually wrong when I said that the Apocalypse has received the most noticeable nerf. Perhaps the Megatron Striker did have received the highest nerf. We will find out. We will find out, because I'll be testing out all of these ships, and we will see what will happen. I just thought that the Apocalypse Striker would be the first one to cover. After all, this is one of the most widely used ships in the game, and a lot of players would notice a significant difference in performance. Now, as for the general units, you have one that increases tracking and the other one that increases range. But if you increase range, you lose tracking. If you increase tracking, you lose range. So both have penalties. And I guess you can pick whichever one suits you best. In my case, I would probably go with extra tracking, because that way I can use the siege mode to easily track small ships into PvP. That way I can apply most of the potential damage. Of course, this is with heat sinks active as well, and I already have one tackle ship that can easily slow down the target. The Daredevil works really well with the Apocalypse as well as with the Revelation. The Apocalypse with the siege mode does act like a mini dreadnought, which means a tackle ship is going to be a very nice choice. Okay, this should be the last ship of this mission. Okay, nice. You know, it does clear
Warp drive active.
the missions very well. And I'm still happy that it does. So I would be very sad if the Apocalypse was nerfed into oblivion. After all, this is one of my first strikers. I actually started flying the Megatron striker before I changed to the Apocalypse. And I used the Trailblazer Nanocore with a very nice red pattern. I noticed a lot of Apocalypse strikers run the same color pattern, not really sure why that's the case. Even the normal Apocalypse
We're under attack.
has a color pattern similar to this one. I guess players just like the red color on the ship. However, I would say that I still prefer the Blood Raider look. The Blood Raider color pattern and camouflage is, I would say, one of the best looking ones. It's really it does look terrifying, and I love it because of that aspect. Now here I think in the third mission I will start encountering some capacitor related issues. With beam lasers, the capacitor related issues would be a lot more noticeable. After all, beam lasers have high range, but they also use a lot more capacitors, so capacitor batteries might be a very wise choice. However, with pulse lasers you could technically avoid using the capacitor batteries. However, in the longer run I feel like I will run out of capacitor at one point, especially if I keep on using the armor repairer. Now, I believe it's possible to completely avoid taking damage if you go with a full sniper build using the beam lasers. However, the damage output, like I mentioned before, would be significantly reduced because you will have multiple tracking computers, or perhaps there's a way to avoid the damage reduction with the general units, but then you will have worse tracking. So I just noticed I'm spinning around in circles trying to find something where I could return the Apocalypse to its previous state, but I guess that is becoming let's say less and less possible. So yeah, in the end I guess we just have to stick with what we have. However, again, I'm pretty sure creative players will come out with some very nice ideas, and I'm very curious to know what you guys think about the nerf on the striker mode, on the siege mode, and how it did change your Apocalypse striker. Did you even notice that there was a change? That's also what I'm curious. I noticed the change because, well, I was wondering why are my lasers not hitting at 50 kilometers? It used to be the case. Well, not anymore. So, finishing up with this mission slowly. Armor repair has been running. I am now into armor. Now if I had I just noticed I have the barrage implant installed, not the thermal implant. Not really sure why I have the barrage on this ship, but okay. I will be taking a lot less damage because I will have extra 20% resistances on all damage types, which means basically 1 free red harder active at all time passively. And throughout this video you could notice that I had to stop shooting at some targets because they were outside of the range, and I actually had to wait for the tracking computers to come back online in order to use the siege mode to quickly destroy the small ships, the cruisers or battle cruisers. But once the tracking computer effect is offline, the damage drops down significantly until I go within the optimal range. The optimal range is 53 without the siege mode and 45 with the siege mode.
Enemy ships
And the last
detected.
wave, they spawned at 40 kilometers, okay.
We're under attack.
Now it's completely possible to run the missions in high sec without the capacitor batteries, but at one point you probably will have to wait for the capacitor to recharge, or you will have to wait for the capacitor to recharge and
We're
prepare
under
your ship.
attack.
Which does slow down the ISK per hour thing, and in order to maximize the ISK per hour you have to keep on destroying the targets in a very quick manner. So in order to maintain that, you have to change the build, and with the changed build the performance will be a little bit reduced. That's basically how this nerf feels on this ship. And again, I'm not really annoyed by it.
Warning,
Honestly, if I
capacitor
were to be
running
real
low.
with you, and I'm always real, but I believe
Warning, capacitor running low.
we all did see this coming from a very
Warning,
very long
capacitor
distance.
running low.
And well, the nerf that
Warning, capacitor
Some-
running low.
some players ask for is here. The Apocalypse Striker is nerfed, and I would say now the strikers do feel like they're about balanced. However, I will give you my full opinion on the nerf when I actually try out the other two striker battleships, the Tempest Striker and the Megatron Striker. Well then, with that being said, hope that you enjoyed this video. Again, feel free to tell me what you think of this nerf. Feel free to tell me if you noticed any change on your Apocalypse, and if you did notice the nerf, how much did it impact your ship's performance? I'm very interested to see what players think about this nerf. So with that being said, hope that you enjoyed. Stay safe, fly safe, and as always, I'll see you next time.